100 years ago, there were many dangerous jobs, but few were more perilous than being a racing driver. Every time you got behind the wheel of one of these, you were not only putting your life into your own hands, but those who built the car, maintained it, and serviced it along the track.
From the earliest exhilarating races of the 20th century to the explosive battles for pole position in modern Formula One Grand Prix, motor racing has always gripped audiences with drama on the track. Record-breaking speeds, risky manoeuvres, fatal crashes. It's easy to understand why all kinds of motorsports are becoming the fastest growing in the world.
But who came up with the idea of racing cars? How have they developed over the years? What's it like to drive in one of them? And does it remain one of the most dangerous jobs in the world?
To find out, I've come to Brooklands Museum in Surrey, the birthplace of British motorsport and home to the world's first purpose-built racing circuit. With the help of experts and a little hands-on experience, I'll discover where it all began over a century ago.
They wanted to build something where they can go as fast as they wanted. I mean, it was terrifying for a lot of drivers.
Exploring the lives of some of the most iconic stars of the racing track.
Andre Dubonnet, he drove in his gentleman's suit.
The cars that made their dreams and nightmares become reality. And how one race would inspire the creation of a multi-billion global franchise.
Right, that's it. Oh! And he's spun out.
That might be my race over.
I think it probably is.
This is the origins of Formula One. Racing through time.
Wow. I think whether you're a sports car enthusiast, a casual racing fan, or even just a history lover, it's tough not to be absolutely blown away by the collection here at Brooklands. And to think that within less than a century, you go from something like this to something like this. I love this exhibit here because you can see the evolution right in front of you, and it makes you think, if this is how far we've come, how far could we go in the future? Is there a limit to our progress? I think one thing we can be sure of is the time, the effort, the risk involved in getting from A to B. Those who put in labour both inside and outside of the vehicles, constantly under pressure to innovate and improve every single metric. I think if we are to truly understand what cars might look like in the future, we need to understand the history behind them. And to do that, we need to go back to the very beginning.
Motor cars were designed to provide a new form of personal transport. But before long, they were used for other purposes.
At the turn of the 20th century, most people were aware of what cars were, but very few had driven them. Car ownership was still very much in its infancy, but already the desire to build faster motors and race them had taken hold. Races across Europe, America and Australia drew large crowds and excitement. But it was here, in the quiet Surrey countryside, that a bold idea took shape. A dedicated motor racing circuit, the first of its kind in the world.
Wow, Beatrice, what a privilege it is to be here. The birthplace, really, of British motorsport, the world's first purpose-built racetrack. I mean, who first came up with the idea of racing cars here?
Well, it was Hugh and Ethel Locke King, who were local landowners that were big motor enthusiasts. They had to go over to mainland Europe to watch races because the car speed limit in the UK was 20 miles per hour. When they returned, they wanted to build something where they can go as fast as they wanted, and so they built this track here.
So it's almost just like frustration and not being able to go fast enough on normal roads.
Absolutely, yeah. So it was built in 1907, and it was built for them and their friends to experience motor racing.
That must have been quite a feat. How long did it take to build this, and how was it designed?
Well, it was designed by a gentleman called Colonel Holden, and originally the Lock Kings had the vision to just have a simple road track, but it was Holden who decided to build two giant banked sections 30 feet high,
Yes.
and made the track what it is today.
Yeah, that's the first thing that strikes you, right? It's these enormous banks, almost remind you of like modern day NASCAR in a sense.
Yeah, it was 30 feet high, and it's the first ever time that they built or used mass-produced concrete. So it was very experimental and a massive feat of engineering at the time. The track then opened in June 1907 to a big parade with Ethel Lock King leading.
Did they have anything to go off? Was there anything preceding this that they could copy the design of?
Absolutely not. I mean, a lot of the terms that we use in motorsport actually come from horse racing. So originally it was horse racing, and they had the paddock where the cars would get together. They actually even weighed the cars and gave them handicaps, just like they do in horse racing.
Right, okay. And you mentioned it opened in 1907. What are the first events that take place here at Brooklands?
Well, actually, race records began before even the first race here at Brooklands. Selwyn Edge did a 24-hour record here, so drove continuously for 24 hours, and they had to use lanterns and things to light the way as he went round the track. And he did that in 66 miles per hour, an average over the 24 hours. And that record stood for 17 years.
So it's not just about racing, there was a big onus to break records here, wasn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of car manufacturers wanted people to do records here at Brooklands to celebrate their cars and to push them out and mean that more people would buy their cars.
Covering 2,500 kilometres on a banked circuit was no small feat, for man or for car. Edge did not stop once, keeping a consistent speed day and night. Thousands of spectators came to watch the record attempt, bolstering Naipier's reputation as a reliable and prolific manufacturer. In the years that followed, more and more daring motorists came to Brooklands looking to add their names to the history books. In 1912, George Stanley broke the 1-hour record at Brooklands racetrack on a Singer motorcycle, and a few months later, Percy Edgar Lambert became the first person in the world to drive 100 miles in an hour. A huge publicity coup for the manufacturers of Talbot cars, and an event remarkably caught on film.
Beatrice, talk to me a little bit about the record that Percy Lambert set here. I can't even imagine going that fast around this track with no safety equipment. I mean, I guess he's just full of adrenaline, right?
Yes, the risk-taking was absolutely incredible. There was lots of press and the general public came to view it, and he actually hit 103 miles in an hour and broke the record. I mean, it was terrifying for a lot of drivers, absolutely incredible here at Brooklands, you know, breaking barriers and risking their lives. And it was just to crack those speeds and to get faster and to build manufacturing.
A chance to break records, accompanied by huge financial incentives for car manufacturers, soon made Brooklands a site of fierce competition and danger. Lambert's record didn't last long, having been overtaken by Jean Chassagne in a 12-cylinder Sunbeam in the same year. The English driver was keen to regain his title. On the 31st of October, Lambert set off. His speed was good, averaging just over 110 miles per hour in the first 20 laps. It was looking good. A rear tyre had disintegrated on the 21st lap, and the car overturned. Still conscious as help arrived, Lambert would die on his way to hospital, 2 weeks before he was due to be married and give up racing for life. He would not be the last fatality that came as a result of a rivalry. The interwar years would see the introduction of the Grand Prix to Britain, with Brooklands hosting the first ever race in the country in 1926 as part of the Automobile World Championship, the first in motorsport. Car manufacturers from across the globe would compete across multiple circuits in Europe and America in a classic race to the finish line.
One car that not only participated in both the first and second British Grand Prix, but claimed the title in both, was this beauty right here, the Delage 15S8. It was designed for the new Grand Prix formula, which was a set of rules and regulations adhered to by all the car manufacturers, and it certainly didn't disappoint. In 1926, French motorists René Sénéchal and Louis Wagner were the first drivers to claim the British Grand Prix title. Why two of them, you ask, with only one seat? Well, you know that saying about cold feet?
A poor start for Delage forced both motorists to push the car to its limits in order to take the crown. The placing of the exhaust near the driver's feet led to incredibly hot conditions, and both Wagner and Sénéchal experienced severe burns, forcing them to take frequent pit stops to dip their feet in cold water. Despite this flaw in the design of the car, the same Delage would cross the finish line in first, second and third place at Brooklands a year later. This was some achievement, considering 8 out of the 13 participants did not even finish the 125 laps, including 5 Bugattis, Delage's biggest rival. It was right next to one of these Bugattis that I met up with Alan Wynne, Vice President of Brooklands Museum, to learn more about the development of these early Grand Prix racing cars.
Alan, we're standing right next to beautiful looking Bugatti Type 37, which was one of the cars that took part in the second British Grand Prix. Where are we in terms of the evolution of the motor car in the 1920s?
Well, you've gone forward a huge distance over the previous 25, 30 years. Something like the Bugatti, the one that actually took part in the 27 Grand Prix is already, we're talking about supercharged, we're talking about technology not dissimilar to the cars of today. Overhead camshafts, 4 valves per cylinder, all these things are starting to happen in Grand Prix cars, and these cars are seriously quick. Even a little 1.5 litre car like this is capable of 100 miles an hour. They handle well, they've got 4-wheel brakes, they stop well. You're talking about really quite sophisticated machines.
Now, sophisticated it may have been, but it was unfortunately one of the cars that didn't finish the second race. What were the sort of problems that these cars were having in this period?
Well, these cars are very highly tuned compared with the normal road-going cars, but also everything about the technology, it's developing, but we don't have the reliability that we have in modern-day racing. In one of today's Grand Prix, you would expect maybe 1 or 2 cars to retire through mechanical problems. When you were in the 1926 Grand Prix, for instance, there were 13 entries, 9 starters, 3 finishers. It was expected that cars would break down, and it was ignition systems, superchargers breaking, gearboxes breaking. In the 26 Grand Prix, the first one of the Talbots, its front axle broke on the very first lap. So the materials that were available to manufacturers were nowhere near as good as they are today. The machining techniques, all those things, the reliabilities were generally not as great. But the other thing you have to remember is that an average Grand Prix in that era was roughly twice the length in distance and in time than a current Grand Prix.
Right, and obviously with all these problems with the car, these are things that the drivers themselves have to deal with. I'm interested about the drivers of the sort of 20s and 30s. Who are they? Where are they coming from? Do they have other professions, or are they full-time Grand Prix racers?
No, there's very few who are professional racing drivers, as you would think of them today, doing nothing but being paid umpty £1 million a year to be a Grand Prix driver. Lots of the drivers were gentlemen drivers who had other careers, such as lawyers or physicians. The guy who stepped into the Delage team in 1926 when all the drivers were burning their feet was Andre Dubonnet of the Drinks Empire, and he drove in his gentleman's suit because he just stepped in at the last minute.
Many drivers clearly took their look more seriously than their health and safety. But there was optional attire for Grand Prix racers, which was intended to give them some form of protection. Emphasis on intended.
Unlike modern Formula One drivers, there's nothing fireproof, not your 7 layers of Nomex. Just a simple overall like this, cotton, no fireproofing, bit of elastic and some rubber buttons. And then on your head, not a wonderful full face crash helmet, a simple leather helmet like this, or even one just made of linen. Pair of goggles. Most of them would be wearing goggles at this stage, obviously because of the wind in your face, but also things like insects and stones being thrown up, especially on somewhere like Brooklands, a concrete circuit. You're getting lots of dust and small stones being thrown up. And then, you'd probably wear a pair of gloves again. Gloves, yeah. Just a bit of hand protection, but nothing out of the ordinary.
Well, through the power of TV, I can get into these clothes remarkably quickly. Well, look at that. How do I look?
Here we are, straight back in the 1920s.
Well, obviously I cannot drive this very precious Bugatti Type 37 around a track, but interestingly, if we slowly move over here, I can drive something that looks very similar, but it's very different in essence, isn't it?
Well, what we're talking about is basically a 2/3 scale Bugatti built by Headley Studios. You won't have to worry about the gear change because it's electric.
Good.
And so hopefully you can get some of the feel for what it was like being out on the track in one of these magnificent machines by driving this.
Now I had on the gear, it was time to see if I had any idea how to drive a 1920s style race car. And what better place to give this baby a test drive than on the Brooklands finishing straight.
Whoa! I mean, this thing accelerates pretty darn quickly. Bit bumpy. You've got to imagine these racing tracks, they weren't completely smooth. Drivers would have had to deal with quite a few bumps. I can't even imagine what it must have been like for the drivers driving 10 times the speed of what I'm driving now. No protection whatsoever. I guess they were just pumped full of adrenaline. But you can see why accidents did occur. And you can see why this was one of the most dangerous jobs throughout history.
Even driving 1/10 of the speed that many of these racers were travelling around the Brooklands circuit gave me a real appreciation of the skill and resilience required to compete at the top level of motorsport. And I'm not the only one. In the mid-20s and early 1930s, races at Brooklands were attracting enormous crowds, and for the drivers, all kinds of attention.
Now, one driver who rose to stardom racing here at Brooklands was a certain Clive Dunfee, son of the renowned Colonel Vickers Dunfee and brother to Jack, who also raced here. Clive soon became the talk of the town with his impressive record on the track. A dashing young lad in his mid-20s, he certainly didn't fare too badly with the women either, marrying leading actress Jane Baxter in 1930. He wouldn't be seen dead in one of these though, for he was a Bentley boy.
They weren't just racers, they were rebels in leather helmets, roaring through the 1920s with speed, style and swagger. Dunfee was part of the club and drove his Bentley Speed 6 to victory in 1931 at the 500-mile Brooklands race. A year later, he was back to defend his crown, this time upgrading his car with a newly installed 8-litre engine. He would also be racing with his brother Jack, who took the first stint, driving the car into 4th place before heading into the pits for a driver change. Clive now took the wheel.
Not long after taking over from his brother, Clive tried to overtake Earl Howe's Bugatti on the outer part of the track. But as he did so, the wheel of his car went over the lip, cartwheeling him into the air. The car smashed into a tree and went into the road surrounding the track. Clive was thrown out and killed instantly.
Clive's wife Jane watched on as the emergency crews rushed to Dunfee's aid. But it was too late. Another life had been lost on the track. But tragic deaths did not stop thrill seekers, nor those who were desperate to break more records and win more races. One of these men was John Cobb. He had raced the Dunfee brothers on that fateful day in a Talbot, but refused to be deterred by the incident. A year later, he privately commissioned the design and construction of a car that would go down in history, kept here at Brooklands.
When it came to breaking records, there were prolific cars, and then there was the Naipier Railton. This beauty with its polished metal bodywork broke more records than just about any other car in its era. 6 world records in 1933, 5 in 1934, it won the 500 miles race here at Brooklands in 1935, and in the same year, John Cobb broke the outer circuit lap record, one that has never been broken since, driving this thing at 143.44 miles per hour.
On the day the Railton broke the record, Cobb hit a bump on the members' banking, travelling faster than the top speed of most passenger cars today. It must have been a nervy moment.
But it wasn't just about the miles per hour, because as the motorsport industry grew in the 1920s and 30s, both spectators and the car manufacturers were eager to test the limits, not just in terms of speed, in terms of endurance.
Now for Le Mans, the 24 hours endurance trial over the South Circuit with 61 entries of every nationality. Prince Nicholas of Romania is one distinguished driver in a brilliant race somewhat marred by bad weather. 2 drivers take it in turns in each car, lugging around the road course at top speed to cover the greatest possible distance in one day and night.
Introducing Le Mans, a race that would test the limits of man and machine. This was an entirely different challenge, but one that was arguably more important and valuable for car manufacturers to overcome. A win at Le Mans meant that your car was not only fast, but reliable. And better reliability equaled more car sales. I was reuniting with Alan, who had rolled out one of the pride and joys of the Brooklands vintage car collection.
You've brought out this absolute beauty for me. What is this?
It's an M45 Lagonda. It's a replica of the car which won Le Mans in 1935.
And when I look at these cars, they just look so aesthetically pleasing. How much does the aesthetic come into it versus the just pure efficiency?
Well, we do have form following function, basically. So it needs a big radiator in the front for cooling purposes. It needs these big headlights to light the way when you're hammering down the back straight at Le Mans in the middle of the night. But yes, there is an individuality about them. So the whole front of this car says Lagonda. The shape of the radiator, the badge, all those things says this is a Lagonda. The style is minimized in terms of frontal area to make it go quicker, so it hasn't got big wide wings that would create extra air resistance. It's got the little aero screens there where you can fold the main windscreen down.
Wow, okay, yeah.
You just have these two little screens, so again you're reducing the frontal area to make it as efficient.
Aerodynamic, yes. And it's interesting you mentioned the big radiator here. How do the cars that drive in Le Mans differ from, let's say, your Grand Prix cars of the 30s and 20s, your Delages, for example?
Well, what you're looking for in a Le Mans car is something that will run reliably for 24 hours. So the ideal Le Mans car is like this. It's got a 4.5 litre 6-cylinder engine. It's a big understressed engine. So whereas the little Grand Prix Delage is developing 170 horsepower at 8,500 RPM off 1500 cc, this is developing fewer horsepower at about 2,000 RPM, but it'll go all day.
So you're sacrificing a little bit of that speed, but these things are like the most reliable cars.
Yeah, and this is really designed to just drive on what were then very rough roads.
Right.
Yeah, for 24 hours with minimal maintenance and intervention, whereas the Delage is designed for 3 hours running at a time. This one you could do for 24.
Talk to me a bit about the Le Mans race itself. Presumably they were happening at the same time as the Grand Prix. How important was Le Mans as an event, a spectacle?
I think in many ways Le Mans was more important in terms of what it could do for a manufacturer because it's proving reliability. The whole thing of the Le Mans race was about demonstrating the reliability of cars rather than their outright speed. Although it became, obviously you've got to be the fastest over the 24 hours, but it's the reliability, and that reliability sells straight back to the customer in the days when cars weren't reliable like they are today. You had to decoke the engine every 10,000 miles, your spark plugs you were replacing all the time, all these things. You don't even look under the bonnet of a current car between services. Something that would demonstrably run for 24 hours at Le Mans was something that the general public would look at and say, yeah, that's a reliable car, I'm interested.
So it's a huge investment for the car manufacturers. If they can win the race, it shows that their car is more reliable, they get more sales out of it. It's huge for the drivers and the car manufacturers.
Exactly, yes. These bonnet straps, they were mandated for racing here at Brooklands and became
And so obviously the drivers who would have sat right here, Alan, they're under a huge amount of stress, a different kind of stress to, let's say, driving a Grand Prix car, but ultimately they've got to be responsible for this thing for a long, long period of time.
Yeah, so they've got to make sure that they're not overstressing the engine, they're not revving it too hard, and they're trying to maintain a consistent speed all the time, and with minimal use of the brakes, because you don't want to wear the brakes out. You don't want to be wearing out the clutch and the gearbox all the time. So it's a different style of driving to do a 24-hour race, and the car, of course, is better set up for it. So the seats will be a lot more comfortable. The car is a big, heavy car. It's got nice soft springs, so that it still handles okay, but it's a much more amenable place in which to sit for a long distance.
Well, Alan, I'm itching to get into the seat of this. Do you reckon you can take me for a spin?
I can take you for a spin.
Right, let's do it.
Right.
have any water, any food in the 24 hours?
Yeah, they, when they have their breaks, and I'm sure they would have carried, you wouldn't have had a plastic water bottle, but
something to keep them going.
Yeah.
An energy bar or something.
Yeah.
And obviously we're on a fairly smooth track, but they would have been going on all sorts of gravel and dirt roads. And
well, the Le Mans circuit is basically laid out on a series of public roads. So it's, yes, whatever the roads were. And certainly in the 20s and into the early 30s, some of the roads were not actually tarmacked. They were good quality gravel roads, but they were gravel roads.
And as a Le Mans driver, what are the things that you're constantly monitoring within the car?
Engine temperature is absolutely critical, and oil pressure. So for instance, in the 1935 Le Mans, in the last hour of the race, the winning car was actually suffering from failing oil pressure, and they had to slow right down in order to get to the finish. And if it hadn't been for the Alfa Romeo pit making a mistake on their lap scoring, Alfa could easily have won that race because the Lagonda had slowed down so much. But in the end, the Lagonda won by just under a lap.
All right, Alan, well that was a lovely spin. Should we see if we can open it up a bit?
Yeah, why not?
Le Mans would evolve throughout the 1930s from a grueling endurance contest into a proving ground for the world's most ambitious automakers. Across all motorsports, the competition between nations intensified. As Bentley faded from dominance, a new wave of innovation emerged from France, Italy and Germany, where state-backed giants like Mercedes-Benz and Auto Union brought cutting-edge technology to the tracks. Speeds increased, designs grew more daring, and the rivalry between nations played out on the circuit. But as political tensions escalated across Europe, the roar of the engines would gradually be drowned out by the drums of war. The final pre-war Le Mans race in 1939 marked the end of an era, but it would be back. As the dust of war settled and Europe's circuits stirred back to life, a new vision for motor racing began to take shape. A more centralised competition was desired, one that maintained the spirit of Le Mans, but was faster, shorter, and more focused on driver skill and engineering precision. In 1946, a new international formula was defined by the AIACR and agreed upon to become effective the following year. The parts were now in place to set up a new global racing competition.
In 1950, the World Drivers' Championship was launched, with the first race taking place at the British Grand Prix at Silverstone on May the 13th. Over 200,000 spectators flocked to the circuit in Northamptonshire to watch the spectacle. This was a whole new era in motorsports.
The championship was to be held across 6 of the major Grand Prix of Europe, plus the Indianapolis 500. It was, in effect, a formalisation of what had already been developing in Grand Prix racing during the previous years. But now, all the best drivers and car manufacturers were competing under the same umbrella. The first championship race was dominated by the blood-red Alfa Romeos, looked upon by the King and Princess Elizabeth II, who attended to catch a flavour. The race impressed spectators who revelled in the excitement and commotion within a new bleak era of post-war communism. Giuseppe Farina would claim first blood, but it was Juan Manuel Fangio, a stocky Argentine already in his 40s, who would become the maestro of the first Formula One decade. He claimed his maiden title in 1951 in an Alfetta and would go on to win 4 more championships. But Alfa Romeo could not stave off a new red-hot Italian threat for long. Ferrari were producing impressive cars with cutting-edge technology, investing heavily in engine development. The V12 gave legendary drivers an edge in both speed and reliability, culminating in multiple championship wins for the manufacturer. But despite the domination of the Italian Grand Prix cars, it was the British Cooper Car Company that were the true pioneers of the era, thinking completely outside of the box to gain an edge over its rivals.
This car represents such an important moment within the history of F1 and motorsports in general. This is a Formula 3 car, the Cooper T72, but it's very much based on the design of the Cooper Climax T51, which was one of the first cars where the engine was moved from the front to the back. Now, Cooper were able to do this by using motorcycle engines with chain drives that made it more natural to put it at the back near the rear-driven wheels. And this not only improved the car's traction, but its handling, acceleration, and ultimately, its endurance. When the first Coopers entered the circuit, the egos at Ferrari and Maserati barely took any notice. That was until a certain Sterling Moss drove a Cooper Climax at the 1958 Argentinian Grand Prix around the circuit without taking a single pit stop and claiming first place. After that, it became a little bit harder not to take notice.
Cooper would go on to win back-to-back championships in 1959 and 1960 with their rear-engined layout, and Australian driver Jack Brabham would claim the Drivers' Championship in both. This change would quickly be mimicked by other car manufacturers and still remains standard for F1 racing cars to this day. Having made the switch themselves in 1961, Ferrari would go on to dominate the decade with their iconic shark-nose design and powerful complementary engines. Again, however, it would be the Italian Titan that would have to play catch-up, as other manufacturers were constantly looking to innovate and improve their cars. In 1968, new adaptations were introduced as the concept of aerodynamics and improved track grip were better understood and prioritised. It was Colin Chapman's Lotus team who brought the concept of front and rear wings to F1 in their Lotus 49B at the Monaco Grand Prix. With grip being so important around the streets of the Principality, the extra traction that came with downforce gave them an advantage at the corners. Lotus already had a simple aerodynamic device at the rear, but in Monaco, the first wings appeared, jutting from the sides of the nose, with Graham Hill taking the crown in the car. This time, other manufacturers were quicker to get up to speed, and at the subsequent Belgium Grand Prix, both Ferrari and Brabham used mounted rear wings for the first time. Since then, wings have come in all shapes and sizes, as experimentation and the introduction of computer modelling have developed wing complexity further and faster towards the Formula One we recognise today. With the evolution of cars and the growth of the sport came the development of racing stars. There have been many down the years, but few come close to the man who drove in this car.
Well, I don't think you can talk about the history of Formula One without mentioning one of the absolute legends of the sport, and that was, of course, the Brazilian maverick Ayrton Senna. This is his McLaren MP46, the famous white and orange. You can already see him holding up the Brazilian flag. The car that he won his third and final championship in 1991. And this represents a really interesting period within the history of F1, a sort of tussle between old and new. Old technologies, for example, this car here still has a manual foot clutch pedal that Senna was using. And then a year later, you have the introduction of anti-lock braking systems, automatic gear changes. These were actually banned a year later because it was felt that they took too much onus off the driver's skill. But it's not just about the evolutions in technology in terms of the car's performance. Safety has always been a consideration with these cars. By this point, obviously, drivers need to wear helmets. They have seat belts that pretty much lock them into position. And by the 80s, you have the introduction of the carbon fibre monocoques that protect the drivers as well. But sometimes, even with all of these improvements in safety measures, fatal crashes still occurred.
Racing stars meant racing rivalries on the track. Clark versus Hill, Hunt versus Lauda. Everyone wanted a taste of fame and glory. To achieve that, you had to win. Sometimes, seemingly, at all costs.
On the inside, and it's happened immediately. This is amazing. Senna goes off at the first.
Once teammates at McLaren, Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna would develop an icy relationship, fueled by the media and incidents on the track. Senna earned a reputation of an extremely competitive, if sometimes irresponsible driver who would push the boundaries to win. With 3 championships already to his name, but a couple of frustrating seasons and car difficulties holding him back from achieving a 4th, Senna pushed his Williams FW16 car to its limits in pole position at the 1994 San Marino Grand Prix. With Michael Schumacher on his tail, Senna's car left the racing line at the Tamburello corner on lap 7, ran in a straight line off the track, and struck an unprotected concrete barrier at over 130 miles per hour. He was airlifted to the nearby hospital, but was pronounced dead shortly after arriving. He was the 2nd fatality of the racing weekend. Whilst some considered Senna's driving style to be reckless, there can be no doubt of his unique skill and ability to get the very most out of his cars. As the gap between the level of these machines has become ever thinner over the last few decades, more responsibility has been placed on drivers to get their teams over the line. Racing tactics, strategy, and teamwork has become just as big a part of success on the track than the performance of the vehicles themselves. But what does it truly take to become a top Formula One driver? To get a sense of the conditions for those in the cockpit, I hopped in Brooklands Mercedes McLaren simulation to see if I could channel my inner Lewis Hamilton in the very car that he drove in his first Formula One race.
Well, Neil, I mean, F1 cars are notoriously some of the most complicated looking wheels I've ever seen, and this is only an 07.
But you're lucky in this case because the car is automatic. All you have to do is accelerate and steer. So when you start, the accelerator and steering, very sensitive.
Okay.
Just be very gentle on the accelerator and steer hard left immediately.
Right, let's get this onto the track, Neil.
Okay, I'll start the simulator. And the exit is just on the right of the tree. And now you can feed the power in.
Okay, I'm giving it some real welly now. 95, 100 miles per hour. And how fast do these things go?
It's about 220 miles an hour.
Ooh.
And as you go under the banner, the timing starts for 2 laps.
Okay. Here we go, under pressure now. I can already feel sort of the tension on my arms when I'm pushing the accelerator over to 220 miles per hour.
And I'm not even dealing with any other drivers on the track. And I'm already feeling the pressure. Oh, I nearly put that round the outer lip of the track. Don't want to be doing that. Oh God, oh my goodness me. Oh, okay. I think that's my, that would have been my race over.
It would, unfortunately.
But I really could feel, I'm sweating already, and that's without any G-force, that's without the crowds, without the other people on the track. And I already feel sort of the tension in the arms. I mean, this is going to be absolutely exhausting for these drivers.
Although it's a simulator, it certainly makes you focus.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for that experience, Neil.
You're welcome.
Sorry I spammed the car out, but that's why we're thankful it's a simulation.
Absolutely.
Well, I don't think I would be surviving this driving.
Modern Formula One drivers face some of the most extreme and demanding conditions of just about any profession. Blistering heat, punishing G-forces, and a constant strain of managing complex hybrid systems, all whilst driving at over 300 kilometers per hour. Drivers can lose up to 4 kilograms of sweat during one single race, having to make constant split-second decisions with limited visibility in a cramped cockpit. It's truly a test of mind, body and machine. Every lap demands total focus, and only the most elite can thrive. Formula One drivers are athletes in every sense of the word, having to train their bodies to manage the physical and mental stresses of the job. And now, in the modern era, with new rules and regulations limiting the evolution of racing cars, drivers themselves are analysed and moulded for maximum efficiency. 1 kilo overweight, and a driver can cost themselves a couple of seconds, which can be the difference between winning and losing a race. As the F1 world continues to straddle the fine line between maximum performance, entertainment and safety, the world has begun to shift towards sustainability, innovation and environmental awareness. Whilst hybrid engines and greener practices have been introduced into Formula One, a bold new idea took shape in 2014.
The cars are all lined up, the lights are coming on, and for the first time, we go green in Beijing.
The future arrived in silence as Formula E was launched, the world's first fully electric racing championship, challenging conventions and redefining the whole essence of motorsport.
The exit of the first corner, and then up towards the left-hander of turn 2. Frank Montani makes a move on his teammate Charles Pic, and Pic's going into the wall.
And this is one of the newest cars in the collection here at Brooklands. This is the Mercedes-Benz EQ Silver Arrow 01. Produced in 2019, it was the manufacturer's first ever racing car designed for the Formula E World Championship, which is officially given FIA status a year later. And I would have just loved to have seen the faces of a Percy Lambert, Clive Dunfee or John Cobb were we to present them with this car. I mean, first of all, the size difference between this and those cars of even the 50s and 60s is absolutely staggering, but it's just so futuristic, even to me. So low to the ground with a top speed of 175 miles per hour. And interestingly, here we have the introduction of the halo, a titanium structure that was made compulsory in 2018 for F1, 2, 3, 4 and E. And I find this really interesting because it reminds us of how dangerous this job really is, and that every single time a driver sits in this car, they're putting their lives at risk. No matter how many rules and regulations are implemented, that fact remains the same.
You only have to compare a Silver Arrow to the cars of the early 1900s to see how motorsport has evolved over the century. But have we now reached a limit? There are now caps on speed, weight, size and aerodynamic capabilities of cars, with those at the top now focusing more on the entertainment and franchising of the sport than its technical development. But there's something about this place that makes me think that we might have the same looks on our faces that Percy Lambert, John Cobb or Clive Dunfee might have had if they saw the Silver Arrow, if, and perhaps when, we are shown the cars of the late 21st century. Because if there is one thing you can take away from being here at Brooklands, it is a feeling of the human desire to innovate, break records and prove the doubters wrong, no matter the cost. 2026 marks the centenary of the first ever British Grand Prix, which took place at Brooklands in 1926, and the museum will be having lots of celebrations throughout the year. Keep an eye out for some upcoming announcements on the Brooklands Museum website. And don't forget to check out my last episode at the site, where we took to the skies.
Rotate.
Wow.
Up we go, positive climb.
For more awesome history content, click the videos on the screen now!